Welcome to part 2 where we're going to still solve by factoring, but we're going to do a more difficult problem. So notice I'm about to show a lot of work, so maybe try and write small on your papers. So step 1, I need to make sure all of my terms are on one side. Here is my leading coefficient of a 2x squared. It's positive, so I'm going to move these two terms to the left. I'm going to start with moving 15. Opposite of a 15x would be minus 15x. I'm going to do that under both sides. Since I have a like term, I'm going to do it underneath its like term. So 15s will cancel. 4 minus a 15 is going to be a negative 11x. I'm going to bring down my 2x squared, and then I'm going to bring down my negative 12. Lastly, I need to move this negative 12 to the right side. The opposite of a negative 12 would be adding 12. So I'm going to add 12 to both sides. Now, unfortunately, you cannot add 12 to an x or add 12 to a 2x squared. So you are just going to rewrite all of this information in order, in standard form. So you've got 2x squared minus 11x plus 12 equals 0. So now that all your terms are to the left side, we can now factor. Now this problem I already know is going to be challenging because you've got a 2 in the front. So if you've got a leading coefficient other than 1, you're going to have a lot of work. So let's factor to this side. I'm going to do my t-chart. Remember in the t-chart, I've got a times c on the left, and then I've got my b term on the right. So my a is a 2. My c is a 12, 2 times 12 is going to be 24. My b term in the middle is negative 11. So I have to figure out what multiplies to get 24 and adds to get negative 11. So lots of things multiply to get 24. For example, 6 times 4. However, a 6 and a 4 would add to get a 10, so that's not going to work. So 8 times 3 is actually going to be 24, and then 8, 9, 10, 11, that could possibly get me to an 11. Now, the only way to multiply and get a positive number, but add and get a negative number, is if both of your terms are negative. So, the answer to this would be actually negative 8 times negative 3, and then negative 8 plus negative 3. Now, since my leading coefficient is not a 1, I cannot jump to put x minus 8 in parentheses. Once you find your numbers, you are going to split up your middle term with these two numbers of a negative 8 and a negative 3. Now, the order doesn't matter. If you wanted to put negative 3 here, you could. If you wanted to put negative 8 here, you could. Make sure these terms have an x because your middle term had an x. So once you have figured out what factors, we're going to drop down the first term and then drop down this last term of a plus 12. I kind of dropped the equals 0 because I already know it equals 0. Shout out to my awesome dog for barking. All right, once I have split up into my 4 terms, I'm going to now factor by grouping. When you're grouping, we're going to draw a line down the middle and look at these first 2 terms. Similar to how I did my second problem over here when I had 2 terms. I'm going to figure out the greatest common factor of a 2 and a negative 8. Greatest common factor, 2 goes into 2, 2 goes into 8, and then they have an x in common. So your greatest common factor is going to be a 2x. Then you're going to have your parentheses and reverse distribute to see what 2 numbers would get you back to this. So 2 times what is 2? It would be a 1, and then x times x would be x squared. Then I'm going to say 2 times what is negative 8, and that's going to be a negative 4. And I don't need an x because I already had an x on the outside. Once you have this step done, this parenthesis has to repeat. So I'm going to take x minus 4 and put it on the other side. It has to repeat. Then I'm going to ask, what times an x will get me to a negative 3x, or what times a negative 4 will get you to a 12. You can also divide 12 by negative 4 to get negative 3 if you are stuck. Your last step is to take your 2 greatest common factors and combine them in one parenthesis. So sorry, my dog is barking. And then we're going to take our parenthesis that repeated, and you're going to write it once. And so you have officially factored a very challenging problem where your leading coefficient was not 1. But unfortunately, we're not done because now we have to solve. So once you have your 2 factored terms, we are going to set them equal to 0. Let's do this right one first because that one's not bad. I've got x minus 4 equals 0. I'm going to add 4 to both sides. I get my answer of a 4. Again, you could just switch the signs. This one is a little bit trickier to solve because you've got a number in front. So I would have 2x minus 3 equals 0. I would need to add 3 to both sides. 3's are going to cancel, leaving you with 2x equals 3. Divide by 2 on both sides to get the fraction 3/2. So again, if you wanted a shortcut, you could switch this sign to a positive 3. Divide by your leading coefficient there if you wanted to skip the process of solving the equation. Okay? So this is a whole lot of work, obviously. So when your leading coefficient is not a 1, you can do a big sigh because we have to do all this work to solve it without factoring. All right. So let's do some practice. What I want you guys to do is try 1, 2, and 3 on your own. Number 1 is a level 1 problem. Not too bad. Number 3 is a level 2 problem. Again, not too bad. And then number 2 would be a level 3. Look how much room I gave you to show your work of an example of what we just did. So press pause and try these on your own, and then I will show you the answers. All right, let's talk about level 1. So step 1, I had to make sure the problem equaled 0, so add 5 to both sides. I did it under its like term to get x squared plus 7x plus 12. I've got a trinomial with 3 terms with my leading coefficient of a 1, so I'm going to do my t-chart. So my a times my c, 1 times 12 is 12. Middle term of 7, I'm going to ask myself what multiplies to get 12, adds to get 7, which would be a 4 and a 3. Since my leading coefficient is a 1, I can jump straight to my parentheses, x plus 4, x plus 3. Then I'm going to solve them, set them equal to 0. Again, I know a shortcut is to switch the sign, and so x would equal negative 4, and x would equal negative 3. On number 3, I need to make sure this equation equals 0, so I'm going to move all my terms to the x squared term that is already positive. To do that, I would subtract 2x. You cannot subtract 2x under anything because they're not alike, so you're going to rewrite it in order. So you'd have x squared minus 2x minus 2 equals negative 2. I need to make sure it equals 0, so I'm going to add 2 to both sides. These end up both canceling out, leaving you with 2 terms left. X squared minus 2x equals 0. When you have 2 terms, you cannot do the t-chart. You've got to take out the greatest common factor. So the greatest common factor would be a 1 or just an x because they have an x in common. X times x is x squared, and then x times negative 2 is negative 2x. Once you have factored, you are going to set them equal to 0. The first one is just x equals 0, so that's your answer. This right one, you would have x minus 2 equals 0. Again, switch your sign if in parentheses to solve. And then let's talk about level 3. Woo! So on level 3, I first had to make sure my equation equaled 0. I started by adding 7x and canceling them out. 7x cannot be added to those 2 terms, so I wrote them in order. 6x squared plus 7x minus 10 equals, and I dropped down my negative 7. I also had to move 7 to the left side canceled out, and negative 10 plus 7 was a negative 3. So my problem finally equals 0. So now I can factor this problem over here on the right side. I can let out a big sigh because my leading coefficient is not a 1. So in my t-chart, I've got a times c, which will be 6 times negative 3 of negative 18, and then a 7. So you're asking yourself what multiplies to get negative 18 but adds to get a 7. Only thing that multiplies to get 18 will be 9 and 2. So I'm going to guess and check to see which one needs to be negative. I know 9 minus 2 is 7, so my 2 needs to have a negative sign. Once you find your terms, you're going to split up your middle term with these two numbers. Again, it does not matter the order. You would still get the answer correct. I put 9x first. Bring down your first term and your last term. Go ahead and split the problem in the middle. We're going to factor by grouping. You're going to ask yourself, what is the greatest common factor between a 6 and a 9? It's going to be a 3. And they both have an x in common. Do your parentheses. Ask yourself 3 times what is 6? That'd be a 2. And x and an x will get you an x squared. And then 3 times 3 is going to give you a 9. Once you have this parenthesis, you're going to rewrite it on the other side. And you can divide these last terms, or again ask yourself what times 2 would be a negative 2, or what times 3 would be a negative 3, to get a negative 1. Well, once you've got your two greatest common factors, you are going to combine them in their first parenthesis, and then take your parenthesis that repeated and write it once. And then we're not done. We need to solve it and set it equal to 0. So your two equations will be 3x minus 1 equals 0, 2x plus 3 equals 0. Once you solve the two-step equations, you would get 1/3 and then negative 3/2. Woo! So that is how you solve by factoring. So now we need to practice. So your practice for today is a Delta Math. Now, Photomath and AI, they are amazing at factoring, right? You could do that insanely hard problem in 20 seconds. So because of that, I need to see your work to receive credit. So show your work on a sheet of paper. To submit it, you're going to take a picture of however many pages you have and upload it to Canvas. And so that is how your work will be graded. So I think you've got 8 problems today, 2 of each. So they go from easier to more challenging. So thanks for watching a video on solving by factoring. And now you guys can practice. Make sure to submit your work so you can get some credit.